So okay, this one's been drying now a couple of hours to go off totally, and as I said, remember, it just, you know, sometimes this stuff feels a lot drier than it really is, so just be a little bit careful with it. So we've got some 6mm Tamiya tape, taking a generous line. Now what I like to do is, obviously I've got too much for this, but obviously the top is where you're going to see it. Find the panel line, which is slightly tricky on this one because don't forget we sanded it. Okay, and we just follow it round, and because it's a curve you're going to end up with kinks, so we said, like we did the canopies, make sure they're down the bottom. Okay, so we have the shorter bit coming round, and then the longer one, making sure you are following the right line. Okay, so then we've got, as I said, too much, but what we're going to do is backfill with this area just up a little bit. Okay, and then end of the tab, just to make it easier when you're unmasking. Okay, fold it back on itself, the top end bit. Okay, and then what will happen is, because we've got a tab on it, we can easily grab it to unmask it, or as you're bound to happen, is what will happen is it will grab onto this and it will unravel. It just makes unmasking a lot easier. Okay, so we've got some 40mm here. Okay, very cost effective 40mm. It is good stuff. Okay. Okay, and that's on. So exactly the same. All off down the end, tiny bit more for the end bit. Just on like this. Goes around. Okay, now make sure you run your finger right round the edge to make sure that is all pushed in. Okay, so next thing we can come up with, he says, making sure the gear doors all close in. In there nice and tight because we don't want to get too much overspray. So the next colour we're going up now is the 8. Get it to be alright here. 308. Okay, now in reality this is really standard F-16 belly colour, which is FS 36375. Okay, for this one. Usual thing, exactly the same as we did before. Good old shake. Okay. Now this is a light grey. It is like the light standard US Air Force grey. Okay, now if you look at some of the reference photos, some of the F-16s tend to have a more of a, what I call a haze blue. It's more of a blue colour, but everywhere I've checked, all the call-outs have called out for this particular colour paint. So same thing again. Thinners going in first, then the paint. Now we're going to use quite a bit of this, purely because we've got to do all the fuel tanks and all the other ones with it as well. Okay, so I haven't got gallons of this paint, to be honest. I've only got the one pot, and I have already used a little bit out of it. So what we're going to do, we're going to do the fuel tanks last, because they will naturally be a slightly different colour to the actual aircraft, because obviously they could be old fuel tanks or worn or something else like that. So it is your little get out of jail free card. In case you run out of paint, you can do a slightly different colour on the other ones, and because it's just a shade difference, nobody's really going to know. Check our flow. Happy how that's coming through. Now, because we've got pre-shading on here, like we did roughly with the nose, we want it to be very, very light. We don't want to be going in here covering it heavy, so we just do a tust area, and it's a little bit speckly at the moment. Now this could be that the paint is just a little bit too thick. Okay, so what we're going to do is pour a little bit back into the colour cup, clear off the side of the colour cup, otherwise you end up with big runs coming down, and we're going to add more thinners to it, because purely it's looking a little bit speckly. Okay, also from the type point of view, it will make the paint go a lot further. Okay, a remix. Now don't forget, when you remix and do things like this, especially like with colour changes, you're left with this part of the paintwork in the nozzle. It's just the original colour, so you need to blow that through first, and you'll probably notice it when it comes through, because it'll be a lot wetter, a lot finer. So that's more like it now. So what we're going to do, we're just literally misting over a layer. We're still shooting 35 psi. Okay, just like this. Okay, now what I'm going to do, we're just going to mist on an entire coat absolutely everywhere. Work our way up, working around everywhere with the model. Okay, and we just do some areas. If they're looking wet, we're going to move away from them. Okay, and just generally taking your time. As we go round everywhere with it. So we're looking a little bit foggy here. The other thing to notice is if you get build up on the end of your needle here, if you might be able to see it, the camera locks in, you've got that blob at the top with this needle here, okay, get rid of it. What that is because we're shooting a lot of paint, it's atomizing it, but it's building up on the end of the needle. Best to get rid of that, otherwise you end up with spitting patterns all over your model. And obviously we don't want that. So as I said, if it's looking too wet, just move off, go somewhere else, okay, and then come back to it. So we'll just do this area around the front. You can probably see the pre-shading still showing through nice and strong. And we've used up a colour cup already on that much. It's looking a little bit wet, so what I'm going to do now, I'm going to flick on the extractor and get the windows open and get some out of it because we're getting a bit foggy in here, but I'm going to carry on and just build up the layers very, very gently. Okay, so this is drying, or yeah, a lot drier was, probably about sort of 10 minutes. So what's actually happening now, you've got this real blotchy, mottly type of look to it all, which is great if you want a very heavy weather type aircraft, but all that's causing this, as we're saying, is the pre-shading is coming through, covering it all very nicely. Now we want to knock it back just a little bit, so we're just going to come in with a second coat, and again right over it. Now we're trying to keep it slightly random, so again we're not totally trying to lose it all, we're literally trying to keep it all there, but we are spraying very loosely, trying to build up sort of natural layers and things like that. Now make sure you do the upper strafes here, obviously down on the top of this air intake. Okay, and then we'll just work our way around this side. So as I say, we're looking for weathered, but not too much, because we don't want to weather this one completely over the top. So we just got a little bit of speckling happening, and that's because we've got build up on the nozzle again. When you're shooting very, very heavily, it does happen. To get round that, if you have got the opportunity, you can always take the protective cover off the end of the needle, but the only trouble with that is you do have to be careful you don't bash it. Okay, so we're just going to pop a few more little bits here. We're just going to try and do a nicer job, making sure we've got the earth intake all done, all around those little lumps and bumps that are all over this one. Make sure you're in from all the angles. Okay, and we're pretty much looking there. We just do these plates at the top, because obviously they're going to be masked in. Now the other thing as well, the sidewinder rails or wingtip pylons are the underside colour as well, so we'll make sure they're sprayed up from the top as well as the bottom. Make sure we've done the ends, the faces and all the things like that on it. Okay, and then generally we're just going to pop round it now, all over, just to make sure we're in. And there we go, that's the underside done. So what we're going to do now, I've already made a start on them, I've done the pylons, we're going to do the fuel tanks, and as I say, if you haven't got this particular paint in that colour, perhaps you can find a different one using a different manufacturer and paint them. If there's a tiny bit of shade difference, it won't make any difference. Okay, so we're all nicely dry within reason, and there we go. all nice done. So we've got the pre-shading showing through, looking grey. Some areas we've totally lost it, admittedly. In other areas it's still quite strong. On the wings is one area you wanted it to. So what we want to do now is just give it another little tone. It's got the dirtiness, it's got a little bit patchy. So now we want to give it a little bit of sort of darkness and bleaching and everything else. Now I say, we are very low on the paint. So what we're going to do is we're going to use the 307, which is the nose one, and then we're going to lighten it. So what we're going to do, good old mix. So if we just get that. Now this is the slightly darker nose colour. So what we're going to do, we're going to put good dollop of thinners. Like this is a 2mm colour cut, it's probably got 1mm of thinners in there. Just blow through, make sure we're still okay, it hasn't dried out too much. Pop the lid on that. Now we're going to take some Tamiya paint. Now as I say, they can all be absolutely mixed together, no problems at all. Okay, a lot of people think you can't mix paints and stuff like that, but honestly, no problem at all with these. Some of them, they can be a little bit funny, but certainly Tamiya and the guns range, no problem. So what we're going to do, very carefully, is just going to pop the grey in. That's going to go in first, just a little bit. Don't forget, we don't want gallons going in here. Okay, then we're going to take the white, equal amounts of grey and white together, mix them up. Now make sure you give them a real good mix, because Tamiya paints tend to be not as synthetic, as we were saying, as the guns range. So make sure it's got a good look. Now you might be thinking, Christ, that's almost white, he's going to ruin it. Because it's thin, as we're going to give it a bit more thinners, it will blend. It won't just sit on the surface. So what we'll do is knock a bit of that out. We've got down here, probably just out of view, bring the camera down. I've got my little patch here, I sort of test spray. Okay, so we're just going to put it through. And as you can see, there's quite a difference between the two, all right? But it's a nice wet colour. It's not too strong at all, all right? So when we come into the spraying the actual F-16, it should give us a nice rate. So what we're trying to do is not paint it, we're literally just trying to blend in. So we're doing some patches, okay, keeping it random. If you get big areas, big flat areas, we're going to give them a little bit more. Okay, we're just literally trying to lighten up. Don't do over the panel lines, try and keep it separate. Okay, but we're just trying to go around and make it all a little bit bleached out, if you like. Okay, and then literally, as I do, just a nice blow over everything, and you'll find it just helps blend it in. So you can see there, it's pretty patchy now. So we want to do the same on the old fuel tanks as well. So if you've got an area, you might want to reverse it. Perhaps let's do the areas where you've got lots of pre-shading showing through, or something like that. I can take care of that. Okay, same thing again, once you're finished, bit of a blow everywhere, and it just makes it sort of toned down, gives it all a slightly different look. A little bit on the pylons perhaps, as I say, not too much, we don't want to go totally over the top. Tailplanes especially, these are nice big flat ones, so they can have perhaps a little bit in the middle, again, over. Okay. A little bit in the middle, over like that. That way it just gives you that sort of patchiness to it all. So we're going to do is say a bit over these tanks. All we're trying to do is break it up, and it's the secret to a sort of authentic paint, is to have different colours and patches and everything else like that. Ideally you don't want that to happen. Alright, because you're going to get bits on the bottom, but I'm not too worried about that. Okay, right the way over. And what will happen is, by the time this has got a wash on it, and all those other things that are going to happen to this particular model, you're going to notice that it's going to darken up anyway. So doing this bit of lightening isn't going to harm anything. Don't think you're ruining it, and it's going to go horrendously wrong now, and all the little things you can have a panic about. Trust me, you'll be okay. Alright? I do wish that wouldn't happen. and that's going to get covered in bits. If you have done that, okay, which I hope you haven't, but don't touch it, let it dry. You can flick the bits off and then re-blow them in. The thing is, these tanks are extremely heavy. That one's okay. So that's the thing with that. Hopefully not putting your hairbrush down and losing the lot. Okay, so what we're going to do now, we are going to tip all this away. Flow it through, coming back with this original grey colour. Okay, thinner's going back in. The original nose grey, so we know it's a couple of shades darker. Again, it's a nice liquid mix. We're not trying to paint, we are trying to tone. Okay, get rid of that. Make sure it's all coming through. Okay, and now we're going to do exactly the same thing again, but not quite as much. So, picking out little areas. Because we're not trying to overcoat any particular thing, we're trying to add to it, okay? So, just little things. And all we're trying to do is just give different shades to different things, okay? And that way you get this nice sort of, you know, mottle paint colour. Instead of it looking like one colour right the way through, we've got multiple colours going on there. So then we're going to just revert now and put this right the way over all the others. Then we're going to let this dry totally overnight. Once it's dried overnight, we can then start masking up and everything and start working on the camo. Right, so we're in a position now to really start sort of getting the paintwork done and the camo pattern. There's a couple of things we want to take care of. First of all is masking. So if you look at your references, you'll notice this area down the side here is actually the same as the underside grey, okay? Obviously we've masked up the nose, we did that before, but the other thing as well we've taken care of, we've masked just down the side, because these pods hang out quite a bit, and as we're blowing, I'm not going to mask hard off the edges under the underside, because really we'll just let the overspray go down and through the extractor, but you might get overspray down on these areas. Pretty easy to touch up afterwards, but it just saves a job. The other thing as well, the top of the pylons, okay, they're great as well, so we just got a little bit of 10mm Tamiya tape here, so all we're going to do is just follow this pylon through just like that, and we'll just wrap them round. Okay, and we've got to do a little bit on the front as well. What is it? Goes round like so. Okay, and make sure we just tuck that neatly underneath, so we don't get any spray. Okay, so that takes care of that side. And again, the other side. So what we'll do, we'll just do this bit first. Try and slip this up the little gap if we can. It always helps. Okay. Just turn it around like so. Okay, just a tiny bit on the back edge. Okay, now, just what I find this, paint colours. Now with this there is a little bit of an option. Okay, now some of the call-outs, depending on different manufacturers of model kits, give different call-outs for it, and the thing is, they're not wrong. By this, what we mean is, obviously we've got the camo colours, and for this one, what we're going to actually be doing is the lightest sand colour, which is FS33531, okay, it's Israeli sand. It's very light, like a beige, okay, pretty much standard to all the Israeli series. Okay, next you've got the brown. Now this is that sort of muddy brown colours that Israeli aircraft have. FS30219, okay, for this one. In this case, these are 313 and H10, okay, so those we've got no problem with. The problem comes along when you start to look at the greens. Now the kit call out for this particular one is for H312, which is FS34227, okay? Now it is Israeli green, now don't get me wrong, but this one is, I think, probably what we call factory fresh, okay? It's got no bleaching or anything else like that that's actually occurred to the aircraft at this time. The other call outs you get with some of the other kits are this other colour. Now this is a very, very faded version of it, which is FS35622. Now this is actually known as a blue, okay, but it is quite a difference. Now when you look at pictures, he says, just trying to grab the... This is the poster that comes with the actual kit, okay? And that green is quite a dark green, okay? I don't think it's quite as dark as the one it gives out in the kit, alright? But when you look at other incarnations of this kit, this is the Hasegawa version of it. You can see it's a lot more pale. It's nothing like what they're calling out with. Now Hasegawa call out for this lighter colour, which I probably think is somewhere between it, but even when you look at the box, this looks a lot paler. So what we're going to do when we come along to it is make a mix out of these two. I'm going to go take the bull by the horns. I'm going to do a 50-50 mix of the two, but obviously a lot of this is bleaching. It's sitting out in very hot weather, very strong light, so obviously over time I imagine all these colours will bleach down, and then obviously with touch-ups and things like that, and especially things like the conformal fuel tanks, they're interchangeable between aircraft. Perhaps you might have an aircraft that's newer, then they switch one over, things like that, a little bit like fuel tanks. So obviously it's a little bit of artistic license on how you want them to go, but say if you're doing a specific type of aircraft, perhaps you're going to go with a particular one and you've seen it, best you check your references online, okay? Have a look at it, be sure what you're going to do, and then just stick to your guns with it. And that bit, when you're down with the club or showing it to friends, you know you'll be right because you've got the photo that goes with it. Because you're always going to get people saying, no, wrong type of green, it should be lighter, should be darker, whatever. So it's going to be a real hard one to get round. Anyway, we don't have to worry about that for the moment, because at the moment we're just getting on with the other bits. So actually what we've got here, we're going to start with the lightest colour. Now, there's loads of different ways of doing camouflage. We've all been there. Some people will do it freehand, and usually I will on an aircraft this size. You can use masking tape, you can use dough worms, things like that. There's lots of different ways to do it. You'll get some people who will follow it round. You get others that will put pencil lines in first and everything else like that. What I tend to do, always work with the lightest shade first, okay? That way, it's easier to overcoat with a darker colour. If you're working it the other way, obviously you can need a few coats to cover up a dark green, or especially the brown with this stuff, otherwise you're going to get a shadowing type colour. So what I tend to do is spray this on, as we're going to do now, quite randomly, and then overlapping an area. I know it's not as wide as it is, but when the brown comes in we can tighten it up into the actual pattern, and then with the green, obviously that'll be the final one, it can be even tighter as we go round. So what we'll do is we're going to start off with this one then. So this is the H313. Good old shape, because that's the first time I've ever used this particular paint. So obviously you do tend to get quite a bit of settling in the bottom of these. Alright, so as you can see we've got the tail planes on and everything else like that. Okay, it's a lovely colour, this one. Same thing again, I'm going to go for like a 50-50 mix, so we're going with thinners in first. Okay, then we're going to pour the paint in. Okay, now when you're using Tamiya paints to this, make sure it gets a good mix. If it doesn't have a good mix, it does have a tendency sometimes to spit or clog. So give it a good old mix round. Okay. Happy how that is. Still shooting very high air pressure. We're still up around about 35 psi. This is still the 0.2 needle we've used for all the other builds, so we're just going to check our flow just like that. Now for this one I'm actually going to use a different set of instructions. This is actually for that Hasegawa kit in 148. The only real reason for doing that is this I can put in front of me, literally just here, to look at it, because unfortunately the one that comes with the kit is this big and not exactly practical for putting them on the desk, but obviously if you haven't got it you can just follow it. But that's the only reason why I've got those instructions set out there. Now just be careful if you're using other people's, because sometimes they have different colours in different places and things like that. So what we're going to do, we'll rotate it to the same as the instructions are on there. And for our case what we'll do is we'll start up here at the nose, and we've got these two lumps which are going to go around this frontal area. Alright, so if we just bring you guys in just a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to do, very lightly, we're just going to mist this on. Sorry, I forgot to mask up the front, which would always be handy. So we're just going to take a little bit of the 40mm tape, going to just follow it along from the line. Always forget one place to mask. Best to do it now though. Just make sure that they're square on. Bring it up a little bit. Okay, that's all in. Make sure all your masking's always firmly pushed down. Okay, let's try that again. At least I spotted it then. Okay, so all we're going to do is basically just going to put this in. Now we know this one comes up here. It's like a pair of eyes. Okay, it's quite a wet mix this. But when you're spraying up against masking tape, just make sure you go right to it. Don't leave it quite faded at the bottom, because when you peel away, it's not like a hard edge. So you want it to be quite a hard edge on that one. So this one, as we know, it comes literally just down the back here. And I'm just going to do the pod itself, even though we know it's going to be grey a little bit later on. So we just do the same on the other side. Just like so. So that's those two on like that. Okay, now there's a bit of a gap between before this goes on anywhere else. So what we'll do, we'll start on the actual wing area. So for this one, it's got this nice swirl which is going to come up here. So roughly, when you're looking at it, look at your instructions, see where the sort of the line goes, and you can roughly work it out from there. So we know it's going to come down off of this panel line. Eventually, as we know, it's going to go up onto the thing, but it comes back off of this wing, okay, in quite a shallow form like this. Okay, it's got a bit of a swirl in here, a bit of a swirl down and then down again. So we're just going to press it in roughly, but as I said, make sure you go too far in, okay. So we go in like that, and then we've got this other one, which is this long, gentle curve up. Okay, curves up and then drops down. Something roughly like that, and then all we're going to do is backfill it. So we're just building it up lightly. Again, we don't want to obliterate the free shading if we can help it. But obviously we do need to make a positive paint job on this. We don't want it to be patchy. Okay, just like so. Alright, now we know this one sort of tapers round to the front, and the fast packs are slightly different colour. These fuel tanks, CFTs, conformal fuel tanks, they sort of bolt on. They might have been sprayed from a different aircraft or something like that at the time. So really, you know, as we were saying, you do have a little bit of artistic license, but this does tend to come along the front here. Because if you do want to do the fast pack as a slightly different colour, don't forget we can just literally come along and redo it. Okay, so it's going to come along in here, and then how far to the front? It literally comes up to about here. That area, just pop back. The colouring in the areas look a little bit patchy. Just like that one. Okay, so then we've got it. It sort of swings around the front end of this here, and is going to come up the front in between these two. There again. Following it through. It's always tricky when you put the first colour on. After you've got the first one on, it sort of makes a lot more sense as you go round it. So it's going to come up, over the front, and then down in here. And don't forget, if you do go wrong with this, I wouldn't worry about it too much, because obviously the next colour on, you can correct the mistake. And in the old days, I would just spray the entire thing and then put the next colour on and then the next colour on. This way it just helps that the pre-shading still will show through. Otherwise, if you cover it in 3 coats of paint, there was no point really doing the pre-shading. So as we go around, we're just going to touch in areas as we see them. Okay, so that's that one done. And then we're just looking round, so it's pretty much all over the spine area. We've got little bits and pieces as we go through the entire thing. So then we've got 1, 2, and then it's going to come up this one up here. Okay. And say the thing is, when you look at the instructions and you look from the side view to the top view, sometimes they change. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to carry on going around in the same fashion as we're doing here until we got all of the same colour on.